Hey, this is how rumors get started. I've been mortified by some of the things being taught to our kids, such as articles like the banality of empathy, or sex work is the best thing young people can do in their careers, or this new article entitled Forget Morality by Ronnie D'Souza. Inside the article we read, "Let me start with a disclosure. I am not a moral philosopher, but I have taught moral philosophy for several decades. I've come to regard the very idea of morality as fraudulent. Morality, I now believe, is a shadow of religion, serving to comfort those who no longer accept divine guidance, but still hope for an objective source of certainty about right and wrong. Moralists claim to discern the existence of commands as inescapable as those of an omniscient and omnipotent God. Those commands moral philosophers teach deserve to prevail over all other reasons to act, always, everywhere, and for all time. But that claim is bogus." She adds, "In this respect, among many others, morality seems like the ghost of religion. Religion is totalizing by its very nature. God knows and judges everything you do and think." She must not be a very good teacher of the subject of morality, because she fundamentally doesn't understand what it even is. In the 19th century, Swiss historian Jakob Burckhardt wrote, "The relationship of religions to morality varies. A religion gives us no standard by which to assess the moral nature of the peoples confessing it. Among the Greeks, for instance, morality was practically independent of religion, and in all probability more closely connected with the ideal of the state." So as Miss D'Souza is pontificating about morality and how it should be rejected because of its origins in religion, she ignores the fact that all the classics on ethics have nothing to do with religion. They were about how to be a good citizen in your community. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, for instance, has nothing to do with the gods. In antiquity, Cicero and Seneca both described ethics as the art of living well. It was seen as a set of best practices for how to get along in life with honesty and integrity. Once again, despite the Greeks and Romans being pious people, the gods are never invoked. At any rate, a viewer named Troya Huggard requested that I do a video on this topic. So I cobbled together a primer, in case you'd like to take a look. There is a problem with the educational system today. Cicero said that a liberal education derives from the Latin word liber, which translates as a free man. Thus, a liberal education is an education worthy of a free man. The education of a free man, said Cicero, consists of teaching a person how to think, whereas the education of a slave consists of teaching him what to think. Most of what passes for ethics today is actually etiquette. People, and people who should know better, often confuse the two. Etiquette is a collection of practices. Ethics is a collection of principles. Etiquette instructs you on how to behave in a very formulaic manner to stereotype situations. It gives you a long list of do's and don'ts. Ethics, on the contrary, gives you a mental model on how to behave in situations that aren't on the lists. All people perceived as great created mental models. The models don't necessarily have to be true, but they have to be somewhat original. They're useful insofar as they help us make sense of the world around us. For instance, John Dalton presented a mental model of the atom through which we now perceive the physical world. Adam Smith, in The Wealth of Nations, presented a mental model of economics which is hard for people to think beyond now. Today, everyone assumes that nations operate as a result of economic conditions, and that even people's behaviors are driven by them. There was a time when no one conceptualized this. They thought of history as random events. Smith taught them otherwise. Natural selection was a mental model by Charles Darwin, based on applying the economic theory of Thomas Malthus to the field of biology. Just as Malthus discussed the problems of overpopulation with not enough food, Darwin applied this to nature to see life as a struggle for resources, with lots of births and even more deaths. Just as the field of economics saw competition as making the surviving companies stronger, so Darwin saw the surviving animals in a species as being the strongest who passed on their hardy DNA to offspring. At any rate, we shouldn't be too concerned about the substance per se, but in the mental models, in other words, the ability to see old things with new eyes. Ethics is just the same. It provides a mental model through which to see the world. For instance, Aristotle distinguishes between two types of people, those who engage in ethical behavior and those who engage in utilitarian behavior. Utilitarian behavior consists of not doing what's right, but doing what's advantageous, and boils down to the idea that the end justifies the means. For instance, to the utilitarian man, if the end goal is obtaining $1 million, he doesn't care if he has to lie, cheat, or steal to obtain it. The only thing that's important to him is the end. The ethical man, by contrast, isn't concerned with the end, but with the means. Socrates, for instance, knew that he might come to a bad end as the powerful demanded his death for teaching the youth critical thinking skills, but he didn't back away. He was willing to accept his death sentence. His integrity, however, would not allow him to veer from what he saw as the truth. What was important to him was not the end, but the means. So much behavior today can be explained by this dichotomy. In the end, cultural shorthand aside, there are no liberals and conservatives. There are no people on the left and the right. There are no Republicans and Democrats. The mental model being presented by morality is that there are only two types of people: people operating according to ethics, and people operating according to utilitarian behavior systems. To return to the idea of mental models, it might be profitable to make an analogy with math equations. In antiquity, philosophers used mathematics to train students in how to think logically. To repeat Cicero, they weren't taught what to think, but how to think. They weren't enjoined to memorize random facts. They were given a mental model, in this case the equation, to be able to figure out what the right answer was, irrespective of the changing circumstances. That's why equations have letters in them, so you can plug in your own numbers as the situation changes. Just take one example, the equation for acceleration in physics. It basically boils down to the finishing point of a journey minus the starting point divided by time. I know this probably sounds mind-numbing, but it's really kind of simple. Take note of where a car starts, for instance. Call it point 0. Then measure where it ended. Subtract one from the other and divide by the time it took. Plotted out on a chart, it would look something like this if acceleration were constant. As an equation, it would look something like finishing point 8 minus starting point of 0 divided by the time of 4 seconds. This gives us an acceleration of 2 meters per second squared. If we change a variable, say make the length of time 2 seconds, then we get 8 divided by 2, which gives us 4 meters per second squared. Of course, you can keep changing the variables, but so long as you have the mental model, the equation, you'd be right every time. This is why a mental model is more useful than memorizing stray random facts. Sadly, most school today is based on memorization, of teaching you what to think, instead of teaching you how to think. And this is why we all hated school. Just memorizing random stuff is useless if it's not part of a larger mental model. To give a man a random fact is like giving him a fish for a day. Mental models are giving the man the tools to feed himself for the rest of his life. Because, let's face it, random out-of-context facts have lost their market value today. You can get random facts from the internet, from your smartphone, from your Echo device at home. Random facts are cheap. What's valuable today is people who know how to think. This is why a lot of people, and very powerful people, are harking back to classical culture, because they provided a very different emphasis for education. I mean, if you're like me, no one ever gave you a mental model for ethics. They never taught you the difference between ethical behavior and utilitarian behavior, the difference between caring about the process, the means, and being more concerned with the ends justifying the means. Or how etiquette is based on random memorization, while ethics is based on having a complex mental model of human behavior. Presently, we'll discuss some additional aspects of this mental model and some of their applications in the modern world. People fear any political leader who has his finger on the red button. What political leaders fear is people having their finger on the red button, the subscribe button. Push it and see their narratives explode. Also consider donating to help keep these videos coming. And don't forget our website and newsletter, thenewamerican.com.